So the miter gauges that come with most saws are not the best way to make crosscuts. I like to use a crosscut sled for that. But I always keep my miter gauge on hand. It's good for if you've got repeated cuts that you know, say you've got to make a cut in the morning, you want to repeat it later that afternoon, but you've got to do a lot of things in between. I'll use the miter gauge, get it to a certain setting, put it aside, come back to it. I also use it for a lot of angled cuts that I don't want to make a jig to go onto an existing jig, so I'll just use the miter gauge. It's a little hard to keep adjusted to 90 degrees or 45 degrees, but it does have its place. So you should take the one that comes with your saw and soup it up just a little bit so you can get better performance out of it. You want to put a long fence on it so that if you're cutting a workpiece, you're not registering just off of that. You've got a bigger surface there. Also, once you get it mounted, you can cut through a portion of this fence. That way, when you're lining up a piece to cut it, you simply line it up with the cut mark. Miter gauges come with a couple of holes drilled in them for exactly this purpose. I've just taken a piece of Baltic birch plywood, rounded the corners over just so it doesn't feel too bad under your hand. I want to make sure I'm an inch and a half overhanging the blade on this side, and then I'll just use an awl and mark the locations of those screw holes and pre-drill those holes a little bit. And I'll just set this in place with a couple of screws. So once you get it mounted, you want to raise the blade just a little bit and take a pass to mark where your saw line will be. So like the zero clearance insert on your table saw, this is going to do the same thing here. So when you make a cut, now this is backing up the material. It's going to cause less tear out on the workpiece. You can also use this to make repeated cuts. A lot of times I will take just a simple stop block like that. Clamp it in place. And that way I can repeat this cut a number of different pieces to exactly the same size. It's a good, easy way to do that. You can also use it to cut distances even longer than the fence you've put on allows. So if I've got to cut a table leg to length, for instance, line that up where you want it. And I've just cut a notch on this, kind of like you would on a push stick. It's about 1/4 of an inch. It hangs down. Set that in place. Set it to whatever length you want. Clamp it down and then make the cut. As you can see, that gives you a nice square cut on the end. You could repeat that, so all your table legs would be exactly the same length. And on the back edge here, there's no tear out at all. That's what it's good for. I just wanted to say a quick word about using stop blocks in relation to your table saw fence. A lot of people will clamp them on. Most people know you don't want to use a miter gauge or any kind of guide on the saw and your fence at the same time. So you wouldn't want to make a cut like this, because what happens is as you cut through the blade, as you cut through the wood rather, the wood's going to bind up here and it's going to kick it back towards you. So the common solution is to put a stop block here. It can just be a scrap of wood and push through. Now this idea works great when you're making really short offcuts. But as the cut gets longer, it's less and less useful. What you need to think about is not just that this isn't hitting the fence, but if it twists when it gets in this opening, you're really worried about the diagonal measurement. So if this is your offcut, the measure from here to here could be longer than that. And if it gets jammed up between the blade and the fence, it's going to kick back towards you. I've seen them go through the wall. They shoot off really quickly. So this is not always the best solution. What you want is something that's going to push it out just a little further from the wall, from the fence. Couple solutions here. This is one. Seems a bit overkill, but it works great, and it looks so nice you don't throw it away accidentally, which is what happens with little pieces like this. Even if they're thicker, you tend to throw them away. This one, you just get 2 clamps in it. It clamps on, works exactly the same way. Again, the same problem though. If you're cutting something at a certain size, the diagonal measurement of what you're cutting could jam up again. So if you want to be extra safe, it's also a little easier to make, possibly, is use something like this. Here's one I've used around my shop for a long time. Same idea. You just clamp it down. It allows you to repeat cuts of that size over and over, and as you can see, you've got plenty of room here. So when I cut through this, there's no offcut that could possibly kick back towards me. Allows you to cut endless numbers of pieces exactly the same size.